Corporal Jackson Shaw thought he was investigating a routine noise complaint at an abandoned farmhouse. His canine partner Thor started acting strange the moment they stepped onto the property, whimpering and pawing at the floorboards. Then they heard it. A whisper that made Jackson's blood run cold. The dog knows. What Thor uncovered beneath those rotting wooden planks would shatter everything Jackson believed about his family, his past, and the very mission he'd dedicated his life to serving. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desolate farmhouse as Corporal Jackson Shaw pulled his military jeep to a halt beside the weathered fence post. The call had come in at 0600 hours, a strange report from a passing motorist who claimed to have heard unusual sounds emanating from the supposedly empty property. Jackson stepped out of the vehicle, his combat boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel, and opened the rear door for his canine partner. Thor, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat that gleamed like burnished copper in the early light, leaped down with practiced grace. The dog had been Jackson's partner for 3 years now, and they'd developed an almost telepathic connection during their deployments in hostile territories. Thor's keen senses had saved Jackson's life more times than he could count, detecting everything from improvised explosive devices to hidden enemy combatants. "All right, boy. Let's see what's got the locals spooked," Jackson murmured, adjusting his tactical vest and checking his sidearm. The farmhouse stood before them like a monument to neglect, its white paint peeling in long strips that fluttered in the cool morning breeze. Broken shutters hung at odd angles, and several windows were boarded up with rotting plywood. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of accumulated debris and years of harsh weather. As they approached the front steps, Thor's demeanor shifted dramatically. The dog's ears perked forward, and a low whine escaped his throat. His tail, usually held high with confidence, dropped between his legs as he pressed closer to Jackson's side. This wasn't the alertness Thor typically displayed when detecting danger. This was something else entirely, something that seemed to unsettle the usually fearless canine. "What is it, Thor?" Jackson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd learned to trust his partner's instincts implicitly. The dog's behavior sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. The front door hung slightly ajar, its brass hinges creaking as it swayed in the breeze. Jackson pushed it open with the barrel of his rifle, the sound echoing through the empty interior like a gunshot. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the gaps in the boarded windows, and the air inside was thick with the musty smell of abandonment and decay. The main room was sparse, containing only a few pieces of furniture covered in yellowed sheets that looked like ghosts in the dim light. A brick fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with old ashes and debris. Jackson moved methodically through the space, his training taking over as he cleared each corner and shadow. Thor followed close behind, his nose working constantly as he processed the myriad of scents that lingered in the stagnant air. They made their way through the kitchen, where cabinet doors hung open to reveal empty shelves lined with faded contact paper. The linoleum floor was cracked and curling at the edges, and water stains on the ceiling suggested years of roof leaks. Everything appeared normal for an abandoned property, yet Thor's agitation continued to increase with each step they took deeper into the house. It was in the back bedroom that they first heard it. "The dog knows." The whisper was so faint that Jackson initially thought it might have been the wind moving through the damaged structure. But Thor's reaction was immediate and visceral. The dog froze in place, every muscle in his body tensing as his hackles rose along his spine. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, and his eyes darted frantically around the room, as if searching for the source of the voice. Jackson's heart hammered against his ribs as he raised his weapon, scanning the empty bedroom with heightened awareness. The room contained nothing but a rusted metal bed frame and a single wooden chair positioned near the boarded window. Dust covered every surface, and there were no signs of recent human presence. "Who's there?" Jackson called out, his voice strong despite the unease crawling up his spine. "This is U.S. Army. Identify yourself immediately." Silence answered him, broken only by the subtle sounds of the old house settling and the distant call of a crow somewhere outside. Thor remained frozen, his body coiled like a spring ready to release. The dog's behavior was unlike anything Jackson had witnessed in their years of partnership. The dog knows what his master cannot see. This time the whisper was clearer, seeming to come from somewhere beneath their feet. Thor immediately dropped to his belly and began pawing frantically at the wooden floorboards, his claws scraping against the aged oak with desperate intensity. Whimpering sounds escaped his throat as he worked, and Jackson could see the intelligence in his partner's eyes, as if the dog understood something crucial that remained hidden from human perception. Jackson knelt beside Thor, running his hands over the floorboards where the dog was focused. At first, everything seemed solid and normal, but as his fingers traced the edges of the planks, he detected something unusual. One section of the floor felt different, slightly raised compared to the surrounding boards. When he pressed down on it, there was a subtle give that suggested hollow space beneath. "Good boy, Thor. You found something, didn't you?" Jackson praised his partner while examining the suspicious area more closely. The floorboards in this section were slightly newer than the rest, their wood grain different, and their finish less weathered. Someone had replaced this portion of the floor, and they'd done so recently enough that the repairs hadn't had time to match the aged patina of the original construction. Using his tactical knife, Jackson began prying at the edges of the loose boards. They came up easier than expected, revealing that they'd been designed to be removable. Beneath the false floor was a metal trapdoor secured with a combination lock that gleamed with newness despite the dust that had settled on its surface. Thor's excitement grew as the hidden entrance was revealed. The dog circled the opening, his tail now wagging with the satisfaction of a job well done, but his eyes remained alert and focused. Whatever lay beneath this floor had captured his attention completely. Jackson studied the combination lock, noting its military-grade construction and the absence of any identifying marks or serial numbers. This wasn't some amateur hiding place. This was professional work, the kind of concealment that suggested serious secrets lay hidden below. "The dog knows the truth that was buried." The whisper came again, clearer now, definitely emanating from the space beneath the trapdoor. Jackson's training warred with his curiosity as he considered his options. Protocol dictated that he should call for backup before investigating further, but something about this situation felt deeply personal, as if he were meant to discover whatever lay hidden below. Thor seemed to sense his hesitation and placed a paw on Jackson's arm, looking up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. The message was clear. They needed to continue together, just as they always had. Jackson tried the most obvious combinations first, military dates and common sequences, but the lock remained stubbornly closed. Then, on a whim inspired by his connection with Thor, he tried the date when they'd first been partnered together, July 15th, 21. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet bedroom. The trapdoor lifted on well-oiled hinges, revealing a set of metal steps that descended into darkness. Cool air flowed up from the hidden space below, carrying scents that made Thor's nose twitch with interest. Jackson retrieved a tactical flashlight from his gear and shined it down into the opening, revealing a small underground chamber that appeared to have been professionally constructed. The space below was much more sophisticated than the abandoned farmhouse above would suggest. The walls were lined with waterproof paneling, and the floor was covered with industrial carpeting that showed no signs of moisture damage or decay. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a small desk sat in the center of the room, its surface covered with papers and folders that had been left as if someone had simply stepped away temporarily. Jackson descended the steps slowly, his weapon ready and his senses alert for any sign of danger. Thor followed close behind, his claws clicking softly on the metal steps. As they reached the bottom, motion-activated lights flickered on, illuminating the chamber in harsh fluorescent brightness that made Jackson squint after the dim conditions above. The underground room was a treasure trove of documents and files, all bearing the distinctive seals and classifications of various government agencies. Jackson's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the CIA letterhead on many of the papers, along with classifications that indicated these materials were far above his security clearance level. Thor moved immediately to one of the filing cabinets, pawing at its base and whimpering with excitement. Jackson pulled open the drawer the dog was indicating and found it filled with manila folders organized with military precision. Each folder was labeled with dates spanning several decades, and many bore the names of operations that Jackson had never heard of, despite his years of service. One folder near the back of the drawer caught his attention because it was labeled with a date that held personal significance, his own birth date. With trembling fingers, Jackson pulled the folder from its place and opened it on the desk under the bright lights. The first document was a birth certificate, but not the one Jackson had grown up believing was his. This certificate listed his father not as Robert Shaw, the insurance salesman who had raised him, but as Marcus Dalton, identified as a CIA operative with a security clearance that placed him among the FIR agency's elite personnel. Jackson's legs felt weak as he sank into the desk chair, staring at the document that challenged everything he thought he knew about his identity. Thor pressed against his side, offering comfort as Jackson struggled to process this revelation. The folder contained dozens of additional documents that painted a picture of a life Jackson had never known existed. Medical records showing genetic markers that had been tracked from birth, psychological evaluations conducted without his knowledge, and most shocking of all, surveillance reports that documented his entire childhood and military career. A photograph near the bottom of the folder made Jackson's blood run cold. It showed a man in his 50s, with Jackson's same dark hair and angular features, standing beside a younger woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Jackson's mother. The woman was holding a baby, and written on the back of the photograph in neat handwriting were the words, Marcus, Elena, and Jackson. Final meeting before reassignment. Marcus Dalton was alive, and everything Jackson had been told about his father's death in a car accident when he was 2 years old had been a carefully constructed lie. Thor suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the stairs as his hackles rose. A new sound had joined the ambient noise of the underground chamber, the soft footfall of someone descending the metal steps. Jackson quickly closed the folder and slipped it into his tactical vest, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. A figure emerged from the stairway, and Jackson found himself face to face with the man from the photograph. Marcus Dalton was older now, his hair gray at the temples and lines etched around his eyes, but there was no mistaking the genetic similarity between them. He wore civilian clothes, but his bearing and the way he moved spoke of decades of military and intelligence training. "Hello, Jackson," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of years of separation and regret. "I wondered when you'd finally find this place." "You're supposed to be dead," Jackson replied, his weapon trained on the man who claimed to be his father. Thor remained alert but didn't show signs of aggression, as if the dog sensed that this encounter, while shocking, didn't represent immediate danger. Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of peace, though his eyes never lost their watchful intelligence. "In many ways, I have been dead for 26 years. Dead to you, dead to your mother, dead to the life I wanted to have. The agency made sure of that." "Why?" The single word carried all of Jackson's confusion, anger, and desperate need for answers. "Because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know, something that threatened people with more power than any one man should possess," Marcus replied, moving slowly to one of the other filing cabinets. "Your mother and I were both CIA operatives, but she got out when she became pregnant with you. I should have done the same." Marcus opened a drawer and withdrew another folder, this one thicker than the first. "Instead, I stumbled upon Operation Silent Shepherd, a program designed to identify and recruit children of intelligence operatives before they reached adulthood. They planned to shape your entire life, guide your choices, ensure that you ended up exactly where they wanted you." End quote. Jackson's mind reeled as pieces of his past began to form a different picture. His seemingly random assignment to K-9 units, his deployment to specific locations, even his partnership with Thor, all of it had been orchestrated by forces he'd never suspected existed. "Thor isn't just any military working dog," Marcus continued, his eyes moving to the German shepherd who sat alert beside Jackson's chair. "He's been specifically trained not just for detection work, but for genetic recognition. That's why he led you here, why he knew exactly where to look. He's been programmed to respond to your specific pheromone signature." The whispers they'd heard earlier suddenly made terrible sense. They hadn't come from a person hiding in the shadows. They'd been recordings triggered by Thor's presence, messages left specifically for the moment when Jackson would discover this hidden chamber. "The dog knows because we made sure he would know," Marcus said quietly. "Every step of your journey here was planned, but not by me. I've been trying to warn you for years, leaving coded messages in places I hoped you'd eventually search. This farmhouse was my final gambit, my last chance to reach you before they moved to the next phase of their operation." Jackson struggled to process the magnitude of what his father was revealing. "What's the next phase?" Marcus's expression grew grave as he opened the thick folder and spread its contents across the desk. Photographs, documents, and maps revealed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and military command. The Silent Shepherd program hadn't ended with Jackson's recruitment. It had expanded, creating an entire network of operatives who believed they were serving their country while actually advancing a shadow agenda. "They want to use you to eliminate the remaining witnesses to their original crimes," Marcus explained, pointing to a list of names that included his own. "Your missions have been carefully designed to place you in positions where you could carry out assassinations disguised as routine operations. Thor's detection abilities would help you locate targets, and your military record would provide perfect cover." The weight of betrayal settled on Jackson's shoulders like a physical burden. Every mission he'd completed with pride, every life he thought he'd saved, every moment of service he'd believed was honorable, all of it had been manipulated by forces that viewed him as nothing more than a weapon to be aimed at their enemies. Thor seemed to sense his emotional turmoil and pressed closer, offering the uncomplicated loyalty that had become Jackson's anchor in a world that suddenly felt unstable and false. At least his bond with the dog was real, even if it had been engineered by others for their own purposes. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your mother didn't die in that car accident either." Jackson's world tilted on its axis as this new revelation struck him. Elena Shaw, the woman he'd mourned for most of his adult life, was alive somewhere, another victim of the web of lies that had shaped his existence. "Where is she?" Jackson demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Safe, but hidden," Marcus replied. "She's been living under deep cover, working to expose the Silent Shepherd program from within. She's the one who's been feeding me information about your assignments, helping me stay one step ahead of their plans." The underground chamber suddenly felt smaller, the weight of decades of deception pressing down on Jackson like a physical force. Everything he'd believed about his life, his family, his purpose, had been carefully constructed lies designed to turn him into an unwitting instrument of corruption. Thor whined softly and pawed at Jackson's leg, drawing his attention to something else in the room. The dog had discovered another hidden compartment, this one built into the base of the desk. Inside was a single photograph of Jackson as a child, playing in a park with both of his parents, all three of them laughing at some shared joke. It was a glimpse of the life that had been stolen from them, the family that had been destroyed by forces they couldn't have anticipated or defended against. "We can't change what's been done," Marcus said gently. "But we can choose what happens next. Your mother and I have been working for years to document their crimes, to gather evidence that could bring down the entire network. But we need someone on the inside, someone they trust. Completely." Jackson understood what his father was asking. Continue to play their game while secretly working to expose them, use his position within their system to gather the evidence needed to destroy them from within. It would be dangerous, requiring him to maintain the facade of loyalty while preparing to betray everything his handlers believed he represented. "What about Thor?" Jackson asked, looking down at his partner. "If he's been programmed to respond to their commands, how can I trust him to help me?" Marcus smiled for the first time since his appearance, an expression that transformed his weathered features and revealed the man Jackson might have known under different circumstances. That's the beautiful irony of their own arrogance. They programmed Thor to be loyal to your genetic signature, not to their organization. His loyalty is to you personally, not to their agenda. They created the perfect double agent without realizing it. Thor's tail wagged slightly at the mention of his name, and Jackson felt a surge of affection for the animal who had become his closest companion. Whatever artificial elements had shaped their partnership, The bond between them had grown into something genuine and unbreakable. The sound of vehicles approaching the farmhouse above sent all three occupants of the underground chamber into alert mode. Marcus quickly began gathering the scattered documents, while Jackson checked his weapon and prepared for whatever confrontation awaited them. "They found us sooner than I expected," Marcus said grimly. "We need to get you out of here before they realize what you've discovered." "I'm not leaving without answers," Jackson replied firmly. "And I'm not leaving without you." Marcus paused in his document gathering, his eyes meeting Jackson's with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Son, I've been running from these people for 26 years. I'm tired of hiding, tired of living in shadows while they destroy other families the way they destroyed ours. It's time for me to make a stand." The footsteps above grew louder and more numerous, suggesting that a significant force had arrived at the farmhouse. Jackson realized that this confrontation had been anticipated, that his discovery of the underground chamber was part of a larger plan that was now coming to its climax. "Your mother is waiting at coordinates I've programmed into Thor's GPS collar," Marcus continued, pressing a small device into Jackson's hand. "She has everything we've gathered over the years, all the evidence needed to expose their operation. Get to her, and together you can finish what we started." Thor suddenly stiffened, his ears perked toward the ceiling as sounds of entry came from the floor above. Voices could be heard giving orders, and the heavy footfalls of tactical teams spread throughout the abandoned farmhouse. They had perhaps minutes before the hidden chamber would be discovered. Jackson made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of fleeing through what he now noticed was a second exit tunnel at the far end of the chamber, he positioned himself at the base of the stairs with his weapon ready. If his father was determined to make a stand, then they would face their enemies together. 26 years ago, they separated our family through lies and manipulation, Jackson said quietly. They're not doing it again. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. You have no idea how proud I am of the man you've become, despite everything they've done to control your path. Thor moved to Jackson's side, his body language shifting into the alert readiness that had served them well in countless dangerous situations. Whatever artificial programming had shaped the dog's initial training, his loyalty to Jackson in this moment was absolutely genuine. The first tactical team member to descend the stairs was met by Thor's explosive charge. The dog had been trained for combat as well as detection, and his attack was swift and devastating. Jackson followed immediately, using the confusion created by his partner's assault to gain tactical advantage. The firefight was brief but intense. Jackson's years of combat experience, combined with his intimate knowledge of close-quarters battle, allowed him to neutralize the immediate threat while Thor continued to harass and distract their attackers. Marcus, despite his years away from active duty, proved that his skills hadn't diminished as he provided covering fire from a defensive position behind the overturned desk. When the shooting stopped, 3 tactical team members lay unconscious or wounded on the floor of the underground chamber. Jackson quickly searched their equipment and found communication devices that would allow him to monitor the ongoing operation above. There are more teams surrounding the property, Marcus said, checking the unconscious men for additional weapons. But I know this area better than they do. There's a tunnel that leads to an old root cellar about a quarter-mile through the woods. They gathered the most critical documents and prepared to evacuate through the hidden passage. As they prepared to leave, Jackson took one last look around the chamber that had shattered his understanding of his own life. The truth was often painful, but it was better than living a lie, even a comfortable one. The tunnel was narrow and dark, clearly dug by hand over many months or years. Marcus led the way with a small flashlight, while Jackson brought up the rear, Thor between them, all 3 moving as quietly as possible through the underground passage. The sounds of the search above gradually faded as they put distance between themselves and the farmhouse. They emerged from the tunnel in a dense grove of oak trees, the concealed entrance hidden beneath a camouflaged wooden cover that blended seamlessly with the forest floor. The morning sun was higher now, and Jackson could hear the distant sounds of vehicles and shouting voices as their pursuers realized that their quarry had escaped. The coordinates in Thor's collar will lead you to a safe house where your mother is waiting, Marcus said as they prepared to part ways. She'll have transportation and new identities ready. From there, you can begin the work of exposing everything we've uncovered. Jackson realized that his father intended to separate from them again, to draw their pursuers away, while Jackson and Thor made their escape. The thought of losing his father again, after just finding him, was almost unbearable. "Come with us," Jackson pleaded. "We can disappear together. Start over somewhere they'll never find us." Marcus shook his head sadly. "They'll never stop hunting us, as long as I'm alive. But if they think they've eliminated the primary threat, they might relax their vigilance enough for you and your mother to work effectively against them." The sound of approaching helicopters in the distance made the decision for them. Marcus embraced his son briefly, a gesture that carried 26 years of missed moments and unexpressed love. "Take care of each other," Marcus said, his hand resting briefly on Thor's head. "And remember, the dog knows more than just what he was trained to know. He knows loyalty, courage, and love. Trust those instincts." Jackson watched his father disappear into the thick underbrush, moving with the fluid grace of a man who had spent decades evading capture. Part of him wanted to follow, to refuse this second separation, but he understood that his father was right. The mission to expose their enemies was more important than any personal desire for reunion. Thor looked up at Jackson with those intelligent amber eyes, as if asking for direction. Jackson activated the GPS device hidden in the dog's collar and studied the coordinates that appeared on the small screen. Their destination was approximately 15 miles northeast, through terrain that would provide good cover from aerial surveillance. They began moving immediately, Jackson's military training guiding their path through the dense forest, while Thor's superior senses warned them of any approaching danger. The journey would take several hours on foot, but it would give Jackson time to process everything he'd learned and prepare for whatever came next. As they walked, Jackson found himself viewing every aspect of his past through a new lens. His childhood had been carefully monitored and guided, his education and career path predetermined by forces he never suspected existed. Even his relationship with Thor, which he'd treasured as one of the few genuine connections in his life, had been artificially engineered. Yet somehow, that knowledge didn't diminish the bond he felt with his canine partner. If anything, it strengthened his appreciation for the way their relationship had transcended its artificial origins to become something real and meaningful. Thor might have been trained to respond to Jackson's genetic signature, but the loyalty and affection between them had grown into something that no amount of programming could have created. They reached the safe house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Jackson of the countless sunsets he'd watched from military bases around the world. The building was a modest cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees, its windows glowing with warm yellow light that spoke of safety and refuge. Thor's tail began wagging as they approached the front door, his sensitive nose detecting familiar scents that confirmed they'd reached their destination. Jackson's heart hammered against his ribs as he prepared to meet the mother he'd believed dead for so many years. The door opened before he could knock, revealing a woman whose features were older and more careworn than in the photographs he'd seen, but unmistakably his mother. Elena Shaw looked at her son with eyes that held years of grief, regret, and desperate hope. "Jackson," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "My beautiful boy, I've missed you so much." Their reunion was wordless at first, a long embrace that tried to bridge the decades of separation and lost time. Thor pressed against both of them, including himself in the family circle with the intuitive understanding that it made him such an exceptional partner. Inside the cabin, Elena had prepared for their arrival with the thoroughness of a trained operative. Mats covered one wall, marked with locations and routes that would allow them to move safely while avoiding the surveillance networks that were undoubtedly searching for them. A table was covered with documents, photographs, and electronic devices that represented years of careful intelligence gathering. "Your father and I have been working separately for years to document their crimes," Elena explained as she poured coffee and set out food for both Jackson and Thor. "We couldn't risk direct contact, but we've been building parallel cases that, when combined, should be enough to expose the entire Silent Shepherd program." Jackson studied the evidence his mother had assembled, seeing connections and patterns that painted a picture of corruption reaching the highest levels of government and military command. Names of politicians, generals, and intelligence officials were linked by lines that showed how the conspiracy had grown and evolved over the decades since its inception. "How many others like me are there?" Jackson asked, pointing to a chart that showed dozens of operatives who had been recruited through similar means. "At least 50 that we've been able to identify," Eleanor replied grimly. "All children of intelligence operatives, all guided into military or law enforcement careers, all positioned to carry out missions they believe are legitimate while actually serving this shadow agenda." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. An entire generation of operatives had been created and deployed without their knowledge, their lives shaped by forces they never suspected existed. Jackson realized that exposing this network would require more than just revealing the truth. It would require deprogramming dozens of highly trained individuals who might resist accepting that their entire worldview had been manipulated. Thor had settled beside the fireplace, but his ears remained alert to sounds from outside the cabin. Even in this moment of reunion and revelation, the dog maintained his protective vigilance, ready to alert them to any approaching danger. "What's our next move?" Jackson asked, studying the intelligence his mother had gathered. Elena activated a laptop computer and showed him a secure communication network that connected sympathetic individuals within various government agencies. "We have allies who've been waiting for enough evidence to move against the Silent Shepherd network. With what your father discovered and what you've learned, we finally have what we need to coordinate a simultaneous exposure across multiple agencies." End quote. The plan was complex, but elegant. Rather than trying to fight the conspiracy directly, they would use its own structure against it, revealing the truth through channels that would make suppression impossible. Media outlets, congressional oversight committees, and international intelligence partners would all receive coordinated releases of evidence that would create a cascade of investigations and revelations. As Elena outlined their strategy, Jackson felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Success would mean vindication and justice, but it would also mean the end of his military career and the beginning of a life lived under constant threat from those they exposed. There would be no going back to the relative simplicity of his previous existence. Thor seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and moved to place his head in Jackson's lap, offering comfort and support as they prepared to embark on the most dangerous mission of their partnership. The dog's presence reminded Jackson that, regardless of the artificial circumstances that had brought them together, they faced this challenge as a team united by genuine loyalty and affection. The next several hours were spent in intense preparation. Elena walked Jackson through the secure communication protocols they would use to coordinate with their allies, while also providing him with new identity documents and financial resources that would allow them to disappear if their mission failed. "Your father should be contacting us within the next 12 hours, Elena said, as they finalized their preparations. "If we don't hear from him by then, we'll know that he's been captured, or worse, and we'll need to proceed without him." Jackson tried not to think about the possibility that he might lose his father again so soon after finding him. Marcus had spent 26 years evading capture, but the forces arrayed against them were formidable, and his decision to draw their attention away from Jackson and Elena had placed him in extreme danger. As if sensing his thoughts, Thor whined softly and pressed closer to Jackson's side. The dog's loyalty and companionship had become even more precious, now that Jackson understood how rare and genuine such connections truly were in his manipulated existence. Dawn was breaking when Marcus finally made contact through the secure communication network Elena had established. His message was brief but reassuring. He had successfully evaded capture and was in position to coordinate the evidence release from his end of the operation. "It's time," Elena said, her fingers poised over the laptop keyboard that would send their carefully gathered evidence to dozens of recipients simultaneously. "Once we initiate this, there's no turning back." Jackson placed his hand over his mother's. Thor pressed against his other side. 3 allies united by blood, loyalty, and shared purpose, preparing to challenge forces that had shaped their lives through deception and manipulation. "For everyone who's been used and lied to," Jackson said quietly. "For all the families they've destroyed and all the truth they'd hidden." Elena pressed the send key, and their evidence began flowing through secure channels to journalists, investigators, and officials around the world. Within hours, the first news reports would begin appearing, and the Silent Shepherd conspiracy would face the light of public scrutiny for the first time in its existence. Thor's tail wagged slightly, as if the dog understood that they had achieved something significant. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family reunited and committed to ensuring that the truth would finally set them free. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as they monitored the initial responses to their revelations. Around the world, people were waking up to news reports that would shake their faith in institutions they had trusted, but would also demonstrate that courage and persistence could triumph over even the most sophisticated dagger. Forms of deception. Within the first hour, Elena's secure laptop displayed confirmation messages from 17 different news organizations across 5 countries. The evidence was spreading faster than any containment protocol could suppress it, and the initial reaction from legitimate government officials suggested that their revelations were being taken seriously by those with the power to act. Thor had positioned himself near the cabin's front window, his amber eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of approaching danger. Despite the success of their initial evidence release, all 3 of them understood that their enemies would not surrender without a fight. The Silent Shepherd program represented too much invested time, money, and political capital to be abandoned easily. Jackson's military training kept him alert, even as he monitored the news feeds on Elena's laptop. Reports were already emerging from Washington, D.C., where several high-ranking Pentagon officials had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Similar actions were being taken in London, Berlin, and Tel Aviv, as Allied intelligence agencies began their own internal reviews of personnel connected to the conspiracy. "Look at this," Elena said, pointing to a breaking news alert from CNN. "Senator Patricia Reynolds is calling for immediate congressional hearings. She's one of the few politicians we weren't sure we could trust, but she's taking a very strong public stance." Jackson read the senator's statement with growing hope. Reynolds was demanding full disclosure of all intelligence programs that involved manipulation of American citizens, and she was specifically calling for protection of whistleblowers who had risked their lives to expose these operations. The political momentum was building faster than any of them had dared to hope. Marcus's next communication came through at noon, and his message brought both relief and new concerns. He had successfully reached a secondary safehouse, but his intelligence contacts were reporting massive internal upheaval within CIA leadership. Several department heads had disappeared overnight, presumably fleeing before they could be arrested, while others were reportedly destroying evidence as quickly as possible. "They're in full damage control mode now," Elena interpreted, reading between the lines of Marcus's coded message. "That means they'll be desperate, and desperate people in positions of power can be extremely dangerous." As if summoned by her words, Thor's low growl drew their attention to the window. The dog had spotted something in the forest that set his hackles rising, and Jackson immediately moved to investigate. Through the trees, he could see the glint of sunlight reflecting off metal, suggesting that vehicles were approaching through the woods, using paths that wouldn't be visible from aerial surveillance. "We've got company," Jackson announced, checking his weapon while Elena began the rapid shutdown procedure for her communication equipment. They had prepared for this possibility, establishing multiple escape routes and contingency plans, but Jackson had hoped they would have more time before being discovered. The approaching vehicles were moving slowly and quietly, suggesting a professional tactical team rather than local law enforcement responding to a routine call. Jackson counted at least 3 separate positions based on the reflected light patterns, indicating a coordinated approach designed to cut off their escape routes. Elena finished securing her equipment and activated a dead man's switch that would automatically release additional evidence if she failed to check in within 24 hours. Their work would continue even if they were captured or killed, ensuring that the Silent Shepherd conspiracy could not simply eliminate them to preserve their secrets. Thor's behavior had shifted into full combat alertness, his body coiled and ready for action, while his eyes tracked movement through the forest that human senses couldn't detect. Jackson trusted his partner's assessment completely, knowing that the dog's enhanced senses would provide them with crucial early warning of any assault. "The back trail leads to a river crossing about 2 miles north," Elena said, shouldering a backpack that contained copies of their most critical evidence. "If we can reach that point, there's a boat cached on the far side that will take us to another safe house." Jackson nodded, understanding that they were now entering a phase of their mission where survival would depend on their ability to stay ahead of forces that had vastly superior resources and manpower. Their only advantages were knowledge of the terrain, the element of surprise, and Thor's exceptional sensory capabilities. The first indication that their position had been compromised came not from visual contact, but from Thor's sudden aggressive posturing toward the cabin's rear door. Someone was approaching from that direction as well, confirming that they were facing a coordinated assault from multiple angles, designed to prevent escape. "Move now," Jackson ordered, and all three of them headed for the window that Elena had previously identified as their primary escape route. The window opened onto a small deck that connected to a zip line she had installed as an emergency evacuation system, leading to a platform in a large oak tree 50 yards from the cabin. Elena went first, sliding down the thin cable with practiced ease, while Jackson provided cover. Thor followed immediately, his specially designed harness allowing him to navigate the zip line safely while maintaining his ability to detect threats below. Jackson came last, just as he heard the sound of breaching charges being prepared at both the front and rear doors of the cabin. The explosion that destroyed the cabin's front door occurred just as Jackson reached the tree platform, the sound echoing through the forest like thunder. Through the smoke and debris, he could see tactical team members moving with military precision as they secured the now empty building and realized their targets had escaped. From their elevated position, Jackson had a clear view of the tactical deployment surrounding the cabin. At least 12 operatives were visible, all equipped with military-grade weapons and communication equipment. These weren't law enforcement officers responding to a routine situation. They were private contractors or intelligence operatives with orders to eliminate witnesses to the Silent Shepherd conspiracy. Elena led them down a concealed rope ladder to ground level, where a carefully prepared escape route took advantage of natural terrain features to provide concealment from both ground and aerial observation. Thor's nose worked constantly as they moved, detecting scents that would warn them of ambush positions or tracking teams. The forest provided excellent cover, but Jackson knew their pursuers would have access to thermal imaging and other advanced surveillance technologies that would eventually overcome any natural concealment. Their only hope was to reach the river crossing before the tactical teams could establish a containment perimeter large enough to prevent their escape. As they moved through the dense underbrush, Elena shared additional intelligence that Marcus had provided about their enemy's capabilities and likely response tactics. The Silent Shepherd program had access to military resources that officially didn't exist, including special operations personnel who had been recruited through the same deceptive methods used on Jackson himself. "Some of the people hunting us probably don't even know they're working for the conspiracy," Elena explained as they paused to check their route. "They've been told we're terrorists or foreign agents, given just enough information to ensure their compliance without revealing the true nature of their mission." This revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. Jackson might find himself facing fellow soldiers who believed they were defending their country against legitimate threats. The moral implications of that potential confrontation weighed heavily on his mind as they continued toward the river. Thor suddenly froze, his body language indicating that he had detected something dangerous ahead of their planned route. Jackson immediately signaled for a halt while his partner's superior senses processed whatever threat had triggered his alert response. After several tense seconds, Thor led them on a detour that avoided what was presumably an ambush position. The detour added precious minutes to their journey, but it also revealed the sophistication of their opponent's tactics. The ambush position Thor had detected was professionally concealed and positioned to intercept anyone following the most logical escape route from the cabin. Only the dog's enhanced senses had allowed them to avoid walking directly into the trap. They reached the river as the sun was beginning to set, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Jackson of peaceful evenings from his childhood. The irony wasn't lost on him that some of those cherished memories might have been artificially orchestrated by the same forces that were now trying to kill him. Elena's cached boat was exactly where she had promised, concealed beneath fallen logs and camouflaged netting that made it nearly invisible from either the water or the shore. The small motorboat was equipped with a silenced engine and navigation equipment that would allow them to travel at night without detection. As they prepared to cross the river, Thor's ears perked up at sounds from the forest behind them. Their pursuers had discovered the escape route and were closing in on their position. Jackson could hear voices calling coordinates and the sound of equipment being deployed for a water crossing operation. "They're faster than I expected," Elena said grimly, as she started the boat's nearly silent engine. "Someone gave them very detailed intelligence about our escape routes." The possibility that they had been betrayed by someone within their small circle of allies was chilling, but there was no time to investigate that concern now. They needed to reach the far shore and the next safe house before their enemies could establish a perimeter that would trap them on the water. The river crossing took 20 minutes of careful navigation through shallow areas and around obstacles that could damage the boat's propeller. Thor remained alert throughout the journey, his senses focused on the shores they were leaving and approaching. Jackson found himself grateful once again for his partner's unwavering vigilance and loyalty. They reached the far shore just as searchlights began sweeping the water from the position they had vacated. Their pursuers had night vision equipment and thermal imaging capabilities, but the boat's insulation and the river's temperature differential provided enough concealment to prevent immediate detection. The safe house on the north side of the river was different from the cabin they had left behind. This was an underground facility built into a hillside, its entrance concealed by what appeared to be a natural rock formation. Elena led them through a camouflage door into a sophisticated command center that rivaled anything Jackson had seen in military installations. "Your father and I have been preparing for this day for over 20 years, Elena explained as she activated banks of communication equipment and computer systems. "This facility has enough supplies and security measures to withstand a prolonged siege if necessary." The underground complex included living quarters, a medical facility, and an armory that contained weapons and equipment from various military and intelligence sources. Most importantly, it housed a complete backup of all the evidence they had gathered against the Silent Shepherd conspiracy, along with automated systems that would continue releasing information even if all three of them were captured or killed. Jackson was examining the facility's security systems when an encrypted message arrived from Marcus. His father's communication contained urgent intelligence about the forces hunting them, including the disturbing revelation that several legitimate military units had been mobilized under false pretenses to assist in their capture. "They're telling conventional forces that we're enemy agents who have stolen classified materials," Jackson interpreted from his father's coded message. "That means we could find ourselves facing soldiers who honestly believe they're defending national security." This development changed the tactical situation significantly. Instead of dealing only with intelligence operatives and private contractors who were part of the conspiracy, they now faced the possibility of confronting regular military personnel who had been deceived about the true nature of their mission. Elena's response was to accelerate their information release schedule, pushing additional evidence to media outlets and government officials before their enemies could craft a convincing cover story. The race was now between their ability to reveal the truth and their enemies' efforts to discredit them as traitors or foreign agents. Thor had found a comfortable position near the facility's main entrance, where his senses could monitor approaching threats while remaining ready to alert his human companions to any danger. The dog's presence had become even more crucial now that they were facing enemies who might include personnel trained to the same standards as Jackson himself. Over the next several hours, Jackson watched news reports that showed the impact of their revelations spreading around the world. Congressional hearings were being scheduled, international intelligence partnerships were being reviewed, and several high-ranking officials had already resigned rather than face investigation. The momentum was building toward a complete exposure of the Silent Shepherd conspiracy. But their enemies were also adapting to the changing situation. Elena's monitoring equipment detected increased military activity in their area, including helicopter patrols and ground teams that were systematically searching every building and hiding place within a 50-mile radius. The net was tightening, and even their sophisticated underground facility might not remain secret much longer. Marcus's final communication arrived at dawn, and its contents made clear that their situation had become critical. He had been forced to abandon his own hiding place and was now moving toward their position while being pursued by multiple tactical teams. More importantly, he had discovered that their location had been compromised by surveillance technology they hadn't anticipated. "Satellite thermal imaging has detected the heat signature from our power systems," Elena interpreted from Marcus's message. They know we're here, and they're preparing a full-scale assault. Jackson realized that their underground sanctuary was about to become a trap. They had perhaps hours before overwhelming force would be brought to bear against their position, and their only hope was to evacuate before the assault began. But leaving the facility would expose them to the military units that had been positioned throughout the surrounding area. Thor's behavior confirmed that immediate danger was approaching. The dog had begun pacing near the entrance, his hackles raised and his eyes fixed on sounds that human ears couldn't detect. Jackson trusted his partner's assessment completely, knowing that Thor's senses would provide their earliest warning of the approaching assault. Elena activated the facility's self-destruct system, ensuring that their enemies would gain no intelligence from capturing their base of operations. At the same time, she transmitted their remaining evidence to a network of automated systems that would continue releasing information regardless of what happened to them personally. "Your father is 3 miles out and moving toward the old mining road," Elena said, studying her tracking display. "If we can reach that rendezvous point, we might be able to coordinate our escape together." Jackson gathered essential equipment while Elena prepared portable versions of their most critical communication systems. They would be abandoning the security of their underground facility for the uncertainty of movement through terrain that was now saturated with hostile forces, but staying would mean certain capture or death. As they prepared to leave, Jackson took a moment to appreciate what they had accomplished, despite the odds against them. The Silent Shepherd conspiracy was now exposed to international scrutiny. Dozens of corrupt officials were facing investigation, and the truth about their operations was spreading faster than any containment effort could suppress it. Whatever happened next, they had succeeded in their primary mission. Thor led them through the facility's concealed rear exit, his senses guiding them away from the approach routes their enemies were most likely to use. The morning air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the underground environment they were leaving behind. Jackson found himself wondering if this might be his last sunrise, and he was grateful to be sharing it with the two beings who meant more to him than anyone else in the world. The explosion that destroyed their underground facility occurred just minutes after they reached minimum safe distance, confirming that Elena's timing had been perfect. The blast would eliminate any evidence of their presence, while also serving as a distraction that might cover their escape attempt. As they moved through the forest toward their rendezvous with Marcus, Jackson reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when he and Thor had first approached the abandoned farmhouse. He had discovered that everything he believed about his family and his purpose had been built on lies, but he had also found the strength to reclaim his identity and fight for the truth. Thor remained at his side through every step of their journey, the loyal companion whose artificial origins had given way to genuine partnership and unbreakable bonds of trust. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jackson knew they would face them together, as they always had, with courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to protecting each other and the truth they had risked everything to reveal.